Great. Hello, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited to teach and discuss embroidery techniques with you. It's sometimes a little bit daunting to step from one hobby you're used to, like cross stitching. You've got it down, you've been doing it for years, into new techniques. So hopefully we can demystify some of those for you today. I've got a few items of business before we begin. First of all, my husband and business partner, co-founder of Stitch People, is right here. He's in the frame today a little bit, but he is keeping an eye on the Q&A. As Felicia mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A and we will try and get to them in real time. But Spencer will keep an eye on those. We are also streaming live on Facebook. So hello to those of you who are in the Zoom webinar and hello to those of you who are watching live on Facebook. For those who have any questions on Facebook, feel free to ask them there. We are keeping an eye on both places. So we'll be able to get to hopefully all of your questions, time permitting, but we are keeping an eye on both places. So feel free to ask questions in either place. I also want to just remind you, if you don't yet have the pattern or supply list, you can find that at stitchpeople.com/Michaels. And one other thing about the Facebook live stream, that means our replay of this video will be immediately available. So if you have to leave a little bit early and you want to catch up, feel free to hop on over to Michael's Facebook page and you'll be able to access the video there instead of waiting 24 to 48 hours when it will be on YouTube as well. So as you're stitching, we would love to see progress photos. When you're done with your project, we'd love to see a final photo posted on Facebook or Instagram. If you use the hashtag Make It With Michaels and or the hashtag Michaels Classes, as well as hashtag DMC and hashtag Stitch People, that is the stitchy hashtag trifecta that will help us see and find your post. We would love to see what you come up with, especially if you put your own special twist on this. I love to see how everybody kind of lets their creativity shine in their individual projects, especially with this being portrait based. Hopefully you were able to customize that a little bit, which leads me to an introduction of myself. So I'm Lizzie Bean. You got to meet Spencer. We started Stitch People, our company, about 10 years ago now. I can't believe it has been that long, 10 years. Our little business is the age of like a functioning fifth grader. Is that 10 years old? Anyway, kind of crazy to imagine. We do cross stitch portraits. That's our niche. We primarily focus on family portraits, but we also have some literary patterns and historical figures and things like that. I will switch to my view so that you can sort of see what we do here. So our primary book is Do It Yourself Stitch People. And again, just by way of introduction, that's me right there, and that's Spencer and our little dog Lucy. The whole point of Stitch People is to inspire your personal creativity and give you tools to mix and match all sorts of portrait patterns, dogs, cats, men, women, children, into beautiful portraits of yourself, of your loved ones, to, you know, commemorate anything and everything. So that is the reason that today's pattern is a portrait, because that's what we do best. So we thought, why not lead with that foot, right? So we have kind of just a generic couple here in a little heart shape. And I want to encourage you, if you haven't cross-stitched this portrait motif yet, please don't feel limited if you don't have a partner. You can stitch your best friend. You can stitch yourself with your dog or your cat or your iguana, whatever. You can just stitch yourself in the center of that heart. If you are having just like a love yourself Valentine's Day this year, which I am all about. And I think that is totally something you should do and I'd love to see. So if you haven't already stitched it, feel free to customize this however you want. We have a ton of color recommendations for hair colors and skin tones and things in the DIY book. But the portrait is totally yours to customize. And hopefully you've had a lot of fun cross-stitching that. Because again, this class is sort of assuming that you know how to cross-stitch, but we are taking our first foray into embroidery. So
quick note, if you are watching on Zoom and you have questions, use the Q&A feature in Zoom. If you're on Facebook and you have questions, throw it in the chat and we'll catch it in both places.
Love that. Thank you, Spencer. So Zoom questions in the Zoom Q&A, Facebook questions in the chat. We've got eyes everywhere, friends. We are watching you Sting style. Every breath you take. Just kidding. I've heard in interviews from him that he's like, no, that song was meant to be creepy. It's about, you know, just to be a little bit leery. I think it's so funny. So anywho, without further ado, as we are watching the chats, Spencer, before I jump in, do we have any questions so far? No, none so far.
People saying hello.
Hello, everyone. Feel free to ask anything. You can ask me anything. I'm pretty much an open book on a personal level. And as far as stitch people go, same thing. And as far as all our techniques go, obviously ask any and every question you'd like to about that. I realize when I'm in this mode, I'd like to talk with my hands, which you can see me in the little camera in the bottom corner, but I can also talk with my hands while you're watching my hands.
Where can they buy it?
Oh, you can buy the book at stitchpeople.com/book. Is our primary. We have a number of pattern books and a huge digital library collection. We've ballerinas and hockey players and everything like that, so that you can make all sorts of memories. But that DIY book that I showed, our primary thing, stitchpeople.com/book. We would love to have you as a stitch person. We just love it. So I also just want to say I did a special Valentine's heart nails very specifically for this class. So enjoy. Without further ado, let's talk about our pattern. So again, I'm not going to get too nitty gritty because the assumption is you've cross stitched before and kind of know how to read a pattern. I made a few hash marks here. I counted out my pattern width and my pattern height from the very top of the heart and the edges of the heart to the very bottom of this little embroidery motif. We've got a pattern that is 30 squares high by 29 squares wide. And as you can see in the supplies recommendations, you could use either size 11 Aida or size 14 Aida. Now, generally speaking, when I'm stitching for myself, and what I generally recommend for Stitch People portraits, because it's, I think, the most common, you can get the most colors in size 14 Aida fabric. That's kind of generally what I recommend is size 14 Aida fabric. Spencer's going to make a slight adjustment to the camera. So if it gets a little bumpy, apologies for that, but it's to make it better. So we've got size 14 Aida fabric, which I actually have. I've got a little thread right there. This is size 14 fabric and this is size 11 fabric. So as you can see, size 11 fabric is a little bit bigger. And I am just going to do my little technical layout here. So size 11 fabric indicates that you have 11 squares or stitches in an inch versus size 14. It means you have 14 squares or stitches in an inch. So if you have more squares in an inch, you're squishing more into the same amount of space. So it's going to be a little bit smaller. So here you can see the difference. And I stitched a little motif example so we could photograph it and advertise it, but I left my portrait blank so that I could do that here with you today. And I'm using size 11 fabric in class because it's bigger. It's going to be easier to see here on the camera. So that's why. I generally use 14 for personal projects. 11 is great for camera visibility. It's also great if you want to fill a bigger frame because it's going to give you a bigger pattern by default. A 29 by 30 pattern that we're using is going to be 2.6 by 2.7 inches on size 11 fabric versus on size 14 fabric. It's going to be just about 2 inches by 2.1 inches. So we're going to have a slightly bigger piece of art to fill a frame if you use size 11 fabric. And some people find the bigger size is just easier to work with. So those are your options. That's why I just want to do a little explanation there. I've got my embroidery needle. I've got my needle minder. For those who've never heard of that, it's just a little magnet thing that you can keep your mind a needle on your hoop here. I've also got my beautiful DMC embroidery scissors, and I have our floss for today. I've pre-cut it just because we've only got an hour and I want to make sure we hit everything. But we have DMC 604, DMC 321, and DMC 986 for the flowers, the roses, and the vine. As recommended on the pattern, I'll pull this down so we can see it a little bit. Perfect. As recommended on the pattern, this is a little bit up to personal preference, but a little bit up to just, I don't know, aesthetics. If you're using size 11 fabric, I recommend using 4 threads of floss. If you're using size 14 fabric, I recommend using 3 threads of floss. Or even some people like to use 2 if you like a little bit more sparse look. That's totally up to you. I'm just speaking again out of my personal preference, what I'd recommend and what I'm doing here so that you can get the hang of it. So as you likely are aware, DMC's a gorgeous floss is made up of 6 separate strands or threads. So I'm going to start stitching with the pink heart, and I'm just going to separate those 6 strands into 4 because again, I'm using the size 11 fabric to stitch this with you today. I'm going to start with the heart because it's my center element, and then I can work out from the sides. The heart is an embroidery stitch. I'm using the satin stitch here. And this again there's a number of ways to do embroidery elements, embroidery florals, embroidered any beautiful embroidered anything. There are so many ways to tackle it. And so if you want to use totally different colors, if you like daisies and you want to do sort of yellow and white flowers, if you like a purple heart because purple hearts, or a yellow heart. I mean, I know a lot of people have their signature color heart emoji that you use when you text. That might be fun to integrate there. I always just use a red heart kind of for anyone and everything because it's the first option. Like I always just use like the yellow emojis and it's just fast. So I tend to use the red heart because it's just right there, but you could totally integrate that. So I've split my 6 strands into 4 to do this stitching, and I'm just running the floss through my fingernails to flatten it out so that my stitches is the word I'm looking for of all the words to go blank on, so that my stitches for this stitching class lay flat and side by side. The point here is to just sort of relax or remove. You can see how these threads are twisted together, and they sort of naturally twist together because that's how it's manufactured. I'm just going to run that along. Some people like to separate all the threads and then recombine them. That is a more surefire way to make sure that they lay flat. But not everybody does that. That's just an extra step you can take, extra precaution. Now I'm going to explain this heart stitch that we're doing. This is going to be a satin stitch. And a satin stitch is called that because when it's done, it looks satiny, especially with the beautiful finish of DMC's floss. There's such a nice sheen to it. It almost looks silky to me. So the satin stitch is really that when you think of like embroidery, or you think of those vintage poodle skirts or monogrammed sweaters or what have you, it's often the satin stitch that you're thinking of. The satin stitch, I'm just going to draw it so that you can sort of visualize it. We've got this heart in the middle, and we'll do our heart like this, and then the satin, that's a terrible heart. I'm not going to be able to live with myself. I have to redo it. I just have to. There we go. Got to go quick. So if this is the shape we're looking to make, the satin stitch essentially is just going to be vertical stitches side by side by side by side by side. It couldn't be easier. I tell you what, it looks like it's going to be, I don't know. I've always been impressed by a satin stitch. It's a very impressive stitch, but it's also very simple. Now I outlined mine in this example after I was done. That is up to you. You can outline in a different color. You can outline in the same color just to finish the edge. Or if you're very careful, and I'm going to go a little bit lighter here, if you're stitching a heart and you're very careful to have your entry and exit points of each of your satin stitches form the shape of that heart, you might not need to outline it at all. I'm going to let you make that decision for yourself. See how I'm being fast, but kind of careful about my start and end points. You might not feel the need to outline it like this after the fact. So I loosely sketched out what I needed to do on the back of my fabric. This is one step for embroidery that sometimes freaks out cross stitchers, because cross stitchers are used to having a pattern like this, and you have your grid on your pattern, you have your grid on your fabric, you find your center point, and you just start stitching counted cross stitch style. It's almost mathematical. Embroidery is a little bit more flexible, and that's what makes it fun. I just want to remind you, this is something I've said before, and I'll always say again, there's no such thing as embroidery police. There's no such thing as cross stitch police. So swap the colors, change the spacing, change the length, try different stitches, do whatever the heck you want, because that is the point, is for you to feel creatively fulfilled and proud of your work. And if that means sticking really close to the pattern, that's okay too. So the thing with embroidery is you've got to get it on your fabric somehow, or you just got to be real careful with your counting of it. So once again, before class, I went into my pattern and I just made a few measurements. Now, if you go side to side on the far edges of this pattern, you can see that the motif is centered. The floral or embroidery motif is centered to the far edges of the pattern, and it is centered to the larger heart right above it. It sits right below. I loosely measured out the heart itself is about 4 by 4 squares, though for some reason I designed it to sit like in the middle of the squares. which is fine. You can shift it down or up by a half a square if you want to be able to utilize the holes in the Aida fabric. That's something with embroidery on Aida, combining cross stitch and embroidery. You're going to have to just like take deep breaths and go zen and just stab your needle outside the holes of the Aida fabric. It's going to feel so crazy at first. It's going to feel so weird, but because embroidery isn't as square as cross stitching, where you're just making these little X's and squares, and it's almost like a video game, right? Where even to create a round edge, it's happening by a series of little squares. Embroidery is not like that. So we're going to be stabbing outside the holes of the Aida fabric, which is why I didn't think anything of designing this motif outside the holes of the Aida fabric. So all that by explanation, I just took a little bit of time and I marked sort of my top most right and left points of my pattern, as well as I loosely outlined this 4x4 box where my heart is going to go. I outlined those on my fabric. I'm just using a mechanical pencil really, really lightly on the back of my fabric. This is out of pure convenience. I could use a soluble pen. I have a heat soluble pen. I don't know where it is. I also have a water soluble pencil. It's in a sewing box somewhere. So I have found that if I just go really lightly with a mechanical pencil on the back of my fabric, it's never given me trouble. It's never pulled through. Just be light, just be careful. Don't let your writing utensil slow you down. That's my motto there. So I'm going to start with the heart. Before class, to save time, I loosely sketched it out just by following the pattern. It's like 1.5 squares down from the bottom of the heart. It goes over 1.5 squares on either side of the heart, and I just counted it accordingly. So now I'm going to take my needle and floss it up. I have about an arm's length of floss here. I tend to stitch, I'm going to switch to my camera view so that you can see me a little better. When I'm cutting my floss, I like to hold the end in my fingers. And generally when I'm cross stitching, a good length is just like mid bicep. That will last you quite a while and it won't tangle as much. With embroidery, I tend to go a little longer. So this is, I've got my arm fully extended, like I feel like that dance move, right? It's just all the way up to my shoulder. So that's going to give you a little more length. Embroidery, I find, is more floss intensive than you might think. So I just licked the ends because I'm an end licker. If you use the wax, I commend you. Again, it's just a time-saving thing for me, and I'm not going to let myself get held back. A lot of people say you shouldn't lick the ends of your floss because it might rust out the inside of the eye of your needle, to which I say, get a new needle. That's my philosophy. Especially because DMC sells them in like packs of 5 or 10, or you get the multi-packs. You don't just buy a single needle. Anywho, so I have flossed my needle, threaded my needle with floss, apologies. And I'm going to start in on my satin stitch. Again, we're just doing vertical stitches side by side by side to create this heart. I'm going to start in the center and work my way out to one side and then double back and do the other side, just so that I'm certain my center point is good. I've got my eye on my pattern over here, and I'm starting from the dip in the heart, which I have made a mark for ahead of time. And I'm just bringing my needle from back to front. And I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail. I'm going to leave a longer tail since I'm using a bigger hoop. And I want all of the stitching that I'm doing to secure that tail down on the back. So I'm going to leave a longer tail for those reasons. And now I'm going to count on my pattern. We're going to go down about, let's see, down to the bottom. What is that? 1, 2, there's about 3 squares. 1, 2, 3. If I poke through here, is that at my bottom point? I'll go a little lower just to match what I had outlined. And I'm trying to poke through my Aida fabric, and I made this terrible mistake of putting on lotion before this class. So my fingers are sliding down my needle. All right, got to find my point again.
Mahogany loves your festive nails.
Yay, thanks, Mahogany. 2022 is going to be the year of more content, which is such a funny word. I don't know if anybody saw Bo Burnham's special. All I think of is his funny song about content. I'm making you content, but it is what the people want. All the people. I mean, TikTok, Instagram Reels, whatever. So I've decided I'm going to lean into festive nails for those content things. If I'm making fun videos with close-ups of my nails, might as well have fun nails. My friend Amelia is a nail artist, and she did my nails and gives me a great excuse to catch up with her, and she can do fun and creative things for all to see. So my first stitch, one thing I like to do with satin stitches is just run the tip of my needle, because again, I'm using a sharp pointed embroidery needle. And I'm just running that through my first stitch just to make sure those threads lay flat and aren't twisted. And I'm just tugging on the back side with that tail, make sure it's long and it didn't pull through. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give myself even a few more cheats and go ahead and lightly draw in the shape of my heart here on the back so that I don't have to do so much counting and thinking. Probably should have done that before I started stitching. Silly me. All right. And now it's honestly just, it's like coloring. That's what a satin stitch is coloring with floss. So I'm going to, my first few stitches, you can either on the back side, go back to the top and then down to the bottom and back to the top and down to the bottom. And the back of your work will look very, very much the same to your front. Or if you're at the end of your floss and you need to conserve, you can just go over a little bit and go back up and then over a little bit and back down. I'll probably do both if I reach the end of this floss. I don't know if that is technically accurate. For those of you who don't know, who've never met me before, first of all, hello, new friend. Second of all, I'm a self-taught stitcher. So some of what I do is not always traditionally accurate. One other little trick that I like to do for satin stitch is leave a little bit of space between my initial stitches, and then I go back and sort of fill in the blanks. So I kind of create the skeleton of my stitching. And you just want to make sure that you are getting as vertical as you can on your stitches. And since I generally don't flip my work back and forth when I'm cross stitching, because just my hand-eye coordination has gotten good and I think it expedites cross stitching a bit. Oh, I can tell I went a little too high there. But with embroidery, because I am following a specific pattern that I've sort of sketched out on the back, I do tend to flip over just a little bit more as I go to make sure that I am following along accurately. Go up to the tippy top. Now I'm right in that part and down to the bottom. And I get a little bit quiet when I stitch because I'm concentrating. That stitch got a little twisty, so I'm just going to run my needle through. Oop, thank you.
Well, we've got a question while you're
love a question.
Quietly stitching. Lisa Samuelson asked, her eyes have disappeared.
Oh no!
She stitched dark brown skin with brown eyes. Do you have any tricks for helping the eyes pop in that kind of situation?
Yes.
Repeat.
So the question was, someone stitched a darker colored skin tone with dark eyes, and they're kind of disappearing into the skin tone, which is alarming, I am sure. So I've got a couple tips there. Let me finish this side and then I'll draw you a little diagram. But you can either remove those stitches that you did of the dark brown eyes and use black just to help them pop a little bit more. And then you could use a single thread of the brown to outline it, and maybe use a little bit of a lighter brown, which might not be as accurate in real life, but it will pop against the darker brown skin tone. Let me see, is this going to be my last? Yes. Oh, see how I've made, I'm pretty accurate on these stitches. I think that's going to be my farthest edge for my heart. Now I'm going to go back through and fill in the blanks a little bit, just so it's a little bit more full. The other thing you could do is, I'm going to just draw a little diagram to answer this eye question. So you've got a cross stitch. What I was saying before is if you do a black cross stitch for the eye and then do one thread outlined like this of a color, kind of looks like an iris. You could also then take a single strand of white floss and do a quarter stitch in one of the top corners. So both of your eyes would be like this, and it looks like a little white glint. You could also go on the other side, but whichever side you choose, make sure it's the same on both eyes. If we have time, I might be able to do that for you and you can see how it looks. But mostly I'm just going to go ahead and speed through this heart, filling in my blanks as I go. And then I'm going to use my needle, and it's hard when I'm zoomed in so close because I have very, very, very little wiggle room for, you know, how much you can actually see.
Just a skosh.
Thank you. It makes it a little crispier on your screen. I know Zoom calls mess with the, what is the word? Resolution's the word I'm looking for. Zoom calls kind of, because you've got so many people on the same call or webinar or video, that resolution takes quite a while to load. So if we zoom in closer, you can see it a little more accurately. About Spence, can you tell me the time? I just want to make sure I get everything in today.
Yep, 28 after the hour.
Oh my goodness. We have plenty of time. Here I'm like, I probably only have 15 minutes to teach everything else. No, no, no. No, no, no. This motif is small and simple so that we could do it all in class together. That's a little trick you might have just seen that I use a lot when I am doing embroidery stitches. Because embroidery stitches are often just to take on a straight stitch, and you often, especially with a satin stitch, like I mentioned, you want it to be a straight. You want it to be real, real straight, so it's very consistent. You can bring your floss up like this, and then sort of take, before you push your needle back through and solidify the stitch, you can sort of take it in your hands and pull it around and see just exactly like, oh, if I do my stitch that way, that's going to be off. And then if I put it here, that's going to be straight down, and I can see right where my needle needs to go.
We've got a question.
I love a question.
Mari asks, when you are going back and filling in the spaces, do you use some of the same holes to go back down in? Or are you trying to keep all the stitches in their own holes?
Generally in their own holes, but sometimes it will reuse. I would say use your best judgment, and you can use that trick that I was just talking about to see if you feel that you need to create a new hole in the fabric or not. So now I'm going to quick bust out this other side of the heart. Just work my way up. I'm curious, for those of you who are watching and who are not cross stitching, or if you want to take a break from stitching and pop in the chat, I'm curious how many of you are new to embroidery. How many of you have never ever done any embroidery before? Is this totally brand stinking new for you? Or are some of you, you know, have you tried it, but you're not super confident? Tell me what your level of experience is with embroidery.
Next question, and if you'll repeat it.
Yeah.
What do you do if you want to do embroidery in a cloth that is not Aida, doesn't have holes?
Well, then you're in luck, because Aida fabric is so stiff and so gridded that that you actually will probably have a bit of an easier time. Most embroidery happens on cotton fabric or on linen fabric because it is truly more of a blank canvas. I just looped some of my tail into my floss here, and it created a little bit of a situation. But yeah, most, oh, we do? Oh, good. Spence said we have a lot of first timers. So welcome, welcome. I hope this is fun and interesting for you. It truly, if you are a seasoned cross stitcher but new to embroidery, if it's freaking you out, and I don't blame you, sometimes it's hard to try something new. One thing that might help is if you think of a cross stitch as just two overlapping straight stitches, which they are, then you have mastered the straight stitch. And all, like so many other embroidery stitches, are just different takes on the straight stitch. So you already know the diagonal straight stitch crossover, which makes a cross stitch. Now we're doing parallel straight stitches, and that's a satin stitch. It really is just variations on a theme, if you will, for the musicians in the room. And that might help demystify it. When in doubt, you might just be working with a variation of a straight stitch. Okay, so my heart is not as defined as I would like it to be. So I probably will, oh, that one was silly. I'm going to redo that stitch, just double up on itself. I probably will outline this one. So I'm going to do one more stitch here on the side. Come on, poke my needle through. Yes, so just to speak to that comment about the Aida fabric really is for cross stitching. Because again, it's a grid, you're making these little squares, you're just kind of making that pixel art look, and it is ideal for that. It is not ideal for something that is a little more interpretive, like embroidery. So the reason I combine them is because we focus on cross stitching with our portraits, and it is possible to do embroidery on Aida. It's not impossible, so it's an option. Just by way of instruction, I've sort of finished my heart coloring. I'm now going to just define the shape a little bit more by outlining it. You don't have to outline it. Again, that's up to personal preference. If you totally nailed your satin stitch, kudos and high fives. I'm just gonna outline mine. But most embroidery happens on plain cotton fabric. Linen is really popular for embroidery because it gives you a nice background. If you really like combining cross stitch and embroidery, I would recommend size 28 Aida fabric. What's cool about size 28 Aida fabric is it's just size 14 Aida fabric times 2. So your cross stitches will actually still be, this again is size 14 Aida fabric, this motif. Your cross stitches will still be the same size as this. You just create your cross stitches instead of going over to one hole, up one hole to do your cross stitches is over 2, up 2. But because it's such a smaller weave of the fabric, it has a very linen-like effect, which is very conducive to embroidery. So that is an option that I would highly recommend for those who feel just absolutely excited about this new skill.
Couple more questions.
I love questions. Bring them on. What's my favorite color? Green. What do I like to eat? Pizza. Just kidding.
Let's see. Okay, so we answered that one about non-Aida cloth. We've got a question about, oh, here it is. There are dies that can poke stitching holes in paper. So you take a piece of paper, you take a die, and you punch it through basically to get the holes, right? Would that still work? Could you use that for a project like this?
That is a really cool idea and a really interesting question. So essentially what we're talking about is perforated paper, which exists on its own. You can buy perforated paper, or if you have like a, I think there's literal like hole punchies that can do that. And also with like Cricuts and silhouettes. So if you create paper, like if you're making a Valentine for someone and you punch holes in it, that is more conducive, I will say, to cross stitching. However, what it could do is give you a nice grid effect around which you could do your embroidery. I honestly, if you want to do embroidery stitches on paper, I wouldn't poke the holes ahead of time. I just poke the needle right through. Now, whether you're using a die cut or using your needle to poke through, that's irreversible. So you want to make sure that you have it really sketched out and you're following a good line, because like this heart right here is not the most defined heart. The one that I did as an example is a little bit better. So you want to make sure that, you know, if you sketched it out on the back, that you've got it really good. But yeah, you could absolutely stitch on perforated paper. I would just be careful how tight you're pulling your stitches so you don't rip the paper. But if it's a nice cardstock, go for it. Perforated paper looks really, really cool. Now I'm going to stitch my greenery, and then we will stitch the leaves and the, because that'll be the same color green, and then we will stitch the roses. So now that we've stitched the heart and I made these little hash marks on my fabric, I'm going to create, I'm just going to lightly sketch the curvature of that green vine. So from the center of my heart, the horizontals, well, I guess that's a vertical center on the side of my heart. I'm just going to lightly sketch up to that point. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. Just bring it down. Now, if you really like what you're learning today, A, awesome. B, congrats for your new interest and passion ignited. And C, you might want to buy embroidery patterns. Embroidery patterns do not come on a grid like this typically. Again, mine does because it is to be combined with a cross-stitch pattern, but you might get an embroidery pattern. Usually it comes in like, it'll have like a hoop outline. So there might be a circle, And then it'll just be like your beautiful design. I don't know what this is, a tree, a piece of seaweed. I don't know. It'll just have your beautiful design. How do you stitch that? Well, you trace it. Sometimes you can outline it with a Sharpie and sort of see it through your fabric, especially if you use a computer monitor or a bright light underneath. Then you put your pattern that's darkly outlined and put your fabric on that. You can lightly outline it. Some people will outline on the front and just trust that their embroidery floss will cover up their pencil marks. But usually embroiderers, and you can Google on, YouTube or whatever. And actually, I wonder if there might be another embroidery class on Michael's classes that you could search for on their YouTube channel. But in DMC, I know they're putting out more videos on their reels and such. Regardless, the whole point is keep your eye out, because embroiderers that are doing strictly embroidery with no counter cross stitch element will just trace right onto their fabric and then stitch over it, which makes it quite a bit easier than the torture I'm putting you through today, combining cross stitch and embroidery. So now I've got another length of floss that is about up to my shoulder. I'm going to separate these strands into 2 groups. I want 4 threads to work with. So I'm just going to pull those apart and then get my lengths to work with. Well, now that I know we've got a bunch of newbies with embroidery, I know a lot of you are probably cross stitchers. And for the embroiderers in the room, if you will, who taught you to stitch? Did you teach yourself? I'm curious how many people are self-taught like me. How many people learned from their mom or their grandma, from a friend, home economics class? How did you learn to stitch? I learned to cross stitch from my mom and my grandma. My grandma did the stamped cross stitch that you trace. My mom did more counted cross stitch. And then I gave it up for years, and then I picked it back up my last year of college, and that's when Stitch People was born. So one thing I like to do, again, like I just mentioned, I'm self-taught by way of many stitching techniques, especially embroidery. What I like to do is give myself tension. So if I were to just start and create this long vine, there's nowhere for that to anchor. So what I like to do is, before I start with a new color, if I've already got something stitched, like our heart, I will just run my needle behind it. Not so much that it's coming through to the front of my work, but I'll just secure this floss on the back ahead of time, instead of worrying about catching the tail and then making sure the tail is down. And now I could pick up this whole thing just with my floss. It is that secure, and I can now begin to stitch. So on either side of my heart here, I'm going to flip over and just make sure that I'm going in where I need to. Whoop. And now I'm just going to create straight stitches. Oh, you know what? I caught a little thread right there. I don't like that separation. So I'm actually going to just push my needle right back through where I came up, because I want to make sure that it looks like it goes right into that heart. There we go. And then I'm going to follow this line. So I'm going to flip back and forth a few times.
Have you already secured that floss?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Next time you start or stop a color, if you just highlight that again.
Sure. And I'm going to do back stitches, just of kind of an equal length. So this is about 2 squares wide. So I'm just going to eyeball up this diagonal. It's about the same width, and just create my line here. And again, this is just straight stitching. You already know how to do this because you do it all the time with cross stitching. We just use the same kind of stitch side by side to create a satin stitch. So we're just kind of doing more of the same right along our line to create our little vine. Pull that through. And then I'll work my way the other direction, creating the lazy daisy leaves, and right up to my final point. I had just marked that ahead of time. So now that we've got our vine, I'm going to run my needle across these straight stitches just to make sure they don't appear twisted. I like to use my needle as a tool. I will use it for way more than just stitching. Like this, I'm almost using it as a little comb. And sometimes I will use it as a picker-outer to pick out mistakes, catch something with the tip of the needle. So I definitely utilize my my needle. So now I'm going to bring my needle up. I don't want to bring it through the floss, so I'm just going to pull the floss to the side with my nail. and bring my needle up. I'm just sort of looking at this pattern, and I'm loosely looking at where this leaf is. And I marked just the way that I did it. I marked that hole, that top right part of this motif is right here. So I'm going to bring my leaf down. That's going to be the top of my leaf. And I'm going to bring my leaf down a bit. And this straight stitch will kind of appear in the middle of the leaf. You'll see what I mean. So I'm going to bring my needle up again, just for personal preference. I don't want to bring it up through the floss, but if you like that look, you totally could. And now we're moving on to a lazy daisy stitch, or sometimes you can connect these and it could be called a daisy chain or a chain stitch. For a lazy daisy that creates a petal or a leaf independently, you bring your floss up like we just did, and you can see it is coming through the front of our work. You then put your needle down exactly in the same hole as you just brought it up through, but don't pull it tight, because obviously that would just pull the floss right back through and you'd have to start over. So I like to keep a hand on the loop that gets made. I'm also just going to twist it so that that loop is not twisted around itself. These portions are side by side. And now I'm going to bring my needle back up from the back to the front at the distance away from the starting point that represents the length you want your leaf or petal to be. So I just want a little leaf. I'll bring it just above that line so it's a little more obvious for you. And you catch that loop with your needle. And when you pull that up, pulling your floss kind of through itself, through that loop you created, it will create a nice little petal or leaf in this case. If you do these all around a starting center point, it looks like a flower. If you do these in a row, it looks like a chain. But once again, I use my needle as a tool to just sort of pull that loop back out, make sure that all my threads of floss are aligned. And then you just do one more tiny little straight stitch. Again, things are all very often just a variant on a straight stitch. You just do a tiny little straight stitch or a tack stitch to hold down the back, or the top from the back. I just caught all of my floss on my fingers as I pulled it through. So there you go.
Well done.
All righty. So there, now we tack it down. And once again, it happened to just lay down a little lopsided. So I'm just going to use my needle as a tool and equal that out. And you can see we've created a delicate little leaf here at the end. And now I'm going to leave a little room for the roses. You can follow this pattern, or you could fill out the whole vine with leaves. You can do whatever the heck you want. I might even, I'm just going to look at this one that I did. Looks like I made this one a little shorter than I made this one, again, because this is on size 11 fabric. So I might actually add, oh, I don't know if you were able to see that. I'm so sorry. So I'm going to actually add one more leaf right that'll ultimately kind of be right here between my roses. I'm just going to eyeball it. So if we're looking at the pattern, you can totally get out your pencil and edit your pattern. And I'm just going to add one more leaf right there, just for interest and just so I can show you another leaf. So I'm going to use this whole of the Aida fabric as my starting point. It doesn't bump right up to the vine, but that's okay because I'm going to have flowers here that sort of covered up. So you bring your needle through and you push it right back in where you came from. Don't pull too fast because you want to keep that loop out. Then you go the distance away from your starting point that you need the length of your leaf to be, and catch that loop like so. Like so, like that. Does anyone follow her on Instagram? Tabitha. She always says like so, like that, which I love. She's the nicest person in the whole world. And then you do a tiny little tack stitch on the end of your leaf to hold it in place. Look how cute. We are doing leaves. This one really wants to fold in on itself. That's okay.
I'm just going to highlight some of the answers that people have put in about where they learned
Here.
to stitch.
Take this.
Oh, well, I'll take the microphone now.
Everybody,
Hello,
so
everybody.
ladies and gentlemen, while I continue to do these lazy daisy leaves, these two, and then I'll work my way up the left side of our motif as just like copying exactly what we did before. I'll just repeat on the left while Spencer tells you stories.
Okay, so we've got some really awesome answers of how people have learned. Lots of family members, grandmas, aunts, mothers. And I just think that's so cool to learn from a family member, because that, to me, that means that the activity means a lot more. I remember as a kid, like I did, model planes with my dad. And anytime I see a model plane,
trains.
you did model trains, yeah. And anytime I see a model plane, or anytime you see a model train, like we think of our dads. And so for people who learn something like this from a grandmother or an aunt or a mother, something like that,
That is very cool.
yeah, you get to, it's kind of a connection to that person. Diane said that she learned from a coworker in Glasgow, Scotland.
Ooh, Glasgow.
Which is
city.
awesome. Yeah, we love Glasgow. And there are quite a few of self-taught
Yay.
people,
Love the gumption.
Yeah, which is so cool, and speaks to just the gumption that you have to learn something on your own, and pick up a book or watch YouTube or something like that. So congrats to all of you. Whether you learned from someone you know or love, or whether you learned on your own, congrats. That's just so cool. And embroidery and stitching is such a cool thing to learn and thing to do. I think it's awesome.
Thanks, Spence. Thanks for sharing some of those stories. Yeah, cross stitching and embroidery is really, really timeless. So it's a way that you can, especially if you learned it from someone else, it's a way that you can connect to your family, but just a way that you can connect to your past in general. Jess asked in the Q&A or in Facebook, what made you start your business? And the reason I thought of this question in relation to the story Spencer just shared is in the I have this like little welcome letter in the DIY Stitch People book that sort of explains how Stitch People got started, which I will tell you in just a moment. But as part of it, it talks about my family. I have a lot of family in New England, and Spencer and I toured the Henry Wadsworth Longfellow House in Portland, Maine. And there is a little cross stitch sampler up on the wall that I think one of his sisters or daughters or something made. And here it is, like 200 years later, just still hanging on the wall. And it's the exact same kind of thing that I'm doing. And I just stood there looking at this beautiful little sampler on the wall, thinking, thinking about how I know how to do that, and what it must have felt like to hold that fabric and work on this thing. That's something that's very, very tangible to me. And so I just love thinking about it like that, and being able to sort of participate in history and in tradition. Now, I want this left side to look a little bit more like my right side. That angle was too much. Let's see. Oh, Spencer just told me it's 1250. To heck with the left side. We have learned straight stitches. We have learned lazy daisy stitches. Let's move on to the roses, folks. Bam. Thank you, Spencer. Here we are, just sharing stories and making friends. I don't want to miss out on our roses. So we learned satin stitch, which is just tightly paralleled straight stitches. We then utilized the straight stitch, or I guess technically we back stitched to create the line and curvature of that vine. We then learned the lazy daisy stitch, which is how you can create leaves and petals by bringing your needle up through a hole, down through the same hole, bringing it up the length of the leaf away, catching that loop and tacking it down. And now I'm going to use my red floss to create a rose. We are going to use the stem stitch for this. I'm going to split my floss, put my needle down on my little needle minder. It just magnets right on there. It's so convenient. A lot of people have their own designs. This is one of our first designs. We sell them on our site, Stitch People. But if you search online, you can find all sorts of fun designs. We just like floss. We're wild about floss. Thanks, DMC, for creating an addiction to beautiful, satiny, lovely, gorgeous colors of floss. I can't believe how many colors they have. So I'm just going to thread my needle, and then I'm going to secure my floss on the back because I like starting with tension. It eases my stress. And again, I pulled it too fast. When I need to center up. There we go. Okay, so pulling it through the back. Don't want to have the stress of letting go of the tail and everything being ruined. So I just secure it from the start. So now I'm gonna, for the sake of instruction, I'm going to swap these colors. I'm going to make a bigger red rose just so that I have more to show you. So I'm going to put that here on my green vine, and I'm going to poke right through the green vine stitch because it's going to be covered up a bit, which is a-okay. And you know what? I'm actually going to scooch it up just a little bit because I'm envisioning how this circle is going to be formed that looks like a rose, and it's going to be, you know, here, and then I want the little pink one to bump right up onto that leaf. So I just wanted to scooch it over a bit. And I'm all paranoid. I'm going to scooch it over even just a little more. So to create a stem stitch rose, again, this is really just a variation of the straight stitches. So satin straight stitch, parallels. We did straight stitch vine. We did a lazy daisy, which is like this. And now our stem stitch rose, we're going to bring our needle up, and you can either get right into it or create a little French knot. So there's a little bonus technique we're going to learn today. And then you basically just create C shapes around and around. I'm pressing too hard because I want this to be dark, and around and around and around. Oh my gosh, I keep breaking this pencil. Deep breaths, Lizzie, we'll have time. Round and around and around and around. And that's how we do it, which is basically just straight stitches, but you start the next straight stitch before you pull the first straight stitch flat. So it kind of bends around itself. I'll show you what I mean. So we start a stem stitch rose with a French knot. So I've pulled my floss through. It is vital that you have tension at this point. Hold your floss slack that's close to your fabric with your left hand. You've got your needle in your right hand, okay? Wrap your needle 2 times. That's it. And then you don't let go with your left hand. Don't let go, Rose. Put your needle through your fabric very, very close to where you came up, but not in the same hole. You don't want your floss, your knot, to pull through. So very close to where you came up, push your needle down. I'm still not letting go with my left hand. I find that to be really helpful. And you'll pull with your right hand to shorten your floss. Don't let go with your left hand. Trust me. It'll create this loop, which then you can kind of wrap around your finger, and you create this nice tension, which you then pull, and then you get a French knot. Bam, baby. French knot mastery. And that's going to be the center of our stem stitch. So you bring your needle up very close to that and create a straight stitch. But before you pull that straight stitch tight, you just kind of keep close to the edges of that French knot. Bring your needle up again in between the A and B points of that straight stitch that you just started. And you catch that stitch kind of on itself, and you'll see it creates a little bend. And you just keep doing that around and bigger until you have a rose. So I've got, now my floss is catching on my needle minder, the hazards of stitching. So I've got my straight stitch, but before I pull it straight, I bring my needle up in the middle point between points A and B of the straight stitch and pull that tight, and it bends around itself. Now I don't really stitch with a frame. I like to stitch with a hoop because I like to have the flexibility of working around and around like I am, where I'm almost like cake decorating, right? Where you're on almost lazy Susan. So create a straight stitch. You've just got a point A and point B, but before you pull it tight, you want to push your needle through in the center between those 2 points. And you'll see the more you do a stem stitch like this, it doesn't have to be directly in the center of those 2 points. You'll see how you can adjust the curvature of the stitch you're doing based on where you place that needle when you bring it up in between your 2 points. Okay, bring it up. And this is just one that you can really play with as you go round and around and around and around. A to B. And you can start making sort of broader and broader strokes. As the flower gets bigger and as you work your way around. What I like about using a stem stitch for a rose specifically is it creates an effect of petals wrapping around each other versus a wagon wheel stitch. Some of you are familiar with a wagon wheel stitch. If you're not, that's okay. It's just a different type of round flower stitch that doesn't look quite as petally. And I think one of the pretty things about roses is how their petals open and bloom out from the center.
Robin's asking, is this like a lazy daisy, but the needle placement is different?
I've never thought about it. Robin asked, is this kind of like a lazy daisy, but the needle placement is different? And I would say kind of. Let me do a little diagram. So with a lazy daisy, you're coming in what we'll call, you come up into point A and you go back down into point A. So you go up and down at point A, which creates a loop. And then you kind of have like a point B and a point C where you have a stitch that tacks it down. Versus here, you have a point A that you're coming out of. You're putting it into a different point B, but before you pull it tight, you're creating a point C in the middle. So what becomes point C of this first part of the stem stitch actually is point A of a new stem stitch, which has a point C that is a point A of a new stem stitch. And then they kind of go around and like that. So kind of similar in that you're catching it on itself as you go around. So we're almost to the end of our class, but that's okay because we're almost to the end of this particular rose. And hopefully you can see on both my camera, I'll hold still here, see how those petals are really coming into play, really coming into shape. And this is the exact same thing that you'll do for the pink rose right next to it, or red rose if you followed the pattern colors. You'll just stop before it gets too big. So this one, let me show you how to end this, and then I'll show you that tie off method too, which is how I pre-secure the floss. So I really like that size for my rose, and I'll do just a slightly smaller one in pink right next to it. To end a stem stitch, you just sort of bring, well, before I have my needle on the other side of my fabric, I'm just going to sort of comb out my threads, and you just sort of take your needle and tuck it down into the center of your stitch and pull through. And it'll create one final petal that sort of disappears into itself like this. And it lays nicely just right down. And we've got a beautiful, beautiful rose with petals that come out from the center, and it just looks gorgeous. Now to tie off on the back, I just run my needle through the existing floss and pull it and use my Gorge DMC embroidery scissors to clip it. And we have a stem stitch rose. So in my final minute, I will brain vomit a review on you. So we learned the satin stitch, even though my heart is a little blobby and bulbous. So I was too excited chatting with all y'all. We've got our satin stitch, which is parallel straight stitches. We used straight stitches create a vine. We did lazy daisy leaves, and we did a stem stitch rose. And those are some really simple but effective, really lots of bang for your buck embroidery stitches that you can use to embellish kind of anything. Use it on your own, use it with a Stitch People portrait, whatever you'd like, anything you'd like. It is totally up to you, and we'd love to see what you have made. So if you post on Instagram, if you post on Facebook, please use the hashtags, hashtag Stitch People, hashtag DMC, and hashtag Make It With Michaels, and or hashtag Michaels Classes, so we can see what you've done, especially if you use different colors or a different layout. I just love to see everything and anything that you come up with. We've got a class in March, which is another free class, just like this one. And then we have a premium class in April. You can go to stitchpeople.com/Michaels to learn more about those and sign up for those. If you have anyone who needs to learn to cross stitch in your life, or if you want to review, we're going to do basic cross stitching in March. But then in April, we're going to be using embroidery techniques to create real hair effects on Stitch People portraits. So that's why it's going to be a little bit more intense. So check out stitchpeople.com/Michaels. Post your works online, use the hashtag so we can celebrate you. And please just note you will get a survey after this class. We'd love to get your feedback, see how it went. And feel free to watch the live replay on Facebook right away or on YouTube in 24 to 48 hours. Big thank you to Michaels and DMC. Big thank you to all of you for joining today. Thank you for Spencer for being my Q&A MC and storyteller. And we will see you very soon in March for our beginning cross stitch class. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thanks again. Ta-ta.